Morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to the session this morning, the opening session even of Open Educational Week, which is about using open educational resources and AI to co-create and deliver digital energy know-how to European citizens. I'm Denise Whitelock. I am the Director of IET at the Open University, here today with my colleagues who are involved in this Horizon project. Next slide. So today's session is introducing you to our project, and we've got 3 strands to let you know about. The learning personas, which Irina will deliver, co-creating the materials, that's Beck, and she's an expert in this area with OERs, and learning pathways, which is Chris, who's also an expert in bringing programs together to create visualizations and explain learning. Thank you. So let's move on to our aims. So we're going to describe the project and our involvement in this big Horizon project. We're going to explain the role of AI and co-creation in developing the learning personas, showcase our learning materials, and we're going to invite you to, if you want, to view these in your own time, and to explore the learning pathways and explain and share with you the lessons we've learned so far from this exciting project. So the Every1 project, its aim is about digitalization. Better put my teeth in, I think. The digitalization of energy. And it was set up to explain to the citizens of Europe the meaning of digitalization, what this means for energy, how we monitor energy, and how it can affect everyday lives. So let's move on to the project itself, which has got 6 big streams. And what we've done is we've had stakeholders and ecosystems involved with us, where we've been able to understand their needs. We've got best practices, barriers and challenges that we're learning about, and for digitalization, turning these into materials and learning pathways through knowledge creation. And we have to understand and evaluate so we maximize impact. And of course, the final package, as you'd expect, would be about management coordination and evaluation. Here are the partners. We've got some pictures of them, and it's a delight to work with them. And we're so pleased to have colleagues from Belgium, Austria, Greece, Germany, Portugal, the Netherlands, Denmark, and ourselves in the UK. And it's a privilege for us to be able to work on this Horizon project from the UK. So we're the Institute of Educational Technology, and we're involved in this project. We're leading on the work package 3, where we're looking at investigating the knowledge gaps in people's understandings and things that we need to explain to our citizens, and the learning pathways that will identify for anyone using the system the training material needs. Work package 4, we're highly involved in, and this is about the knowledge creation, capacity building, and the training materials leading to their development, which we have completed for the online materials through OpenLearn. And then we're involved in dissemination, exploitation, and the communication strategy. And we hope you'll be part of that too and be able to tell your colleagues about this exciting project, which affects everyone. So here's our team. There's me, Denise Whitelock. Leanne Perryman's not with us today, but she's co-I on this project. We've got Chris Edwards, who's going to tell us about the pathways. We've got Beck Pitt, who's going to tell us about the materials and how we've used OERs. And we've got Irina with us, who's going to tell us about the pathways. And she's going to start off in a minute. Before we start, though, I have some things I want you to be aware of. Thank you for introducing yourselves. We see that in the chat. That's brilliant. Please carry on doing that. Also, please put your questions into the chat. Also, into the Q&A session you'll find on your bar at the bottom of your screen. And we will try and answer those questions. So what we're going to do, we're going to work through for 20 minutes each speaker, and then I will look at some questions, a couple of questions to ask the speaker. Then we'll move on, and at the end, we'll go through all your questions, and I'll have some final announcements. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite...
Sorry, Denise, can I just say something? Early on, there was a message to us saying that the slides couldn't be seen. Can someone put in the chat to say whether you can see the slides or not before we carry on? Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I just thought I needed to check that before we. Thank you.
Yes, it won't be working too well if you can't see the slides. That's great. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Irina. She's a senior research fellow, has done tremendous work on this project. And we look forward to hearing how you used AI as well to investigate and discover what learning personas are relevant to this important work. Thank you, Irina. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Denise. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be presenting the work from the project. So I'll start by talking about learning personas. It might be that many of you are familiar with this term, with this concept. As Denise mentioned, a big part of our role in the project is to create learning materials. And the first step in creating a learning material is to have an in-depth understanding of what target learner audience is like. So if we are to define learning personas, these are profiles, fictional profiles of a target audience for a learning material. And generally, to be able to develop these, we need quite some resources and involvement of experts. So we need to gather some information about learners' demographic skills, experience, training goals, brainstorm what their motivation is to be joining a course or to be following a learning material, and then creating this profile. So that's quite time consuming, and it requires resources to be able to do that. So the question we had in the project is, can we use AI to be able to create learning personas and save time, save resources, but at the same time, not to lose on the quality of what we are doing? So with this question in mind, we embarked on co-creating with AI. So if we go in the next slide, there we can see the current template that is used at the Open University. So we have a big learning design team, and they are involved in developing these personas for many of the OU's undergraduate and graduate courses. So as you can see from the template, there are quite a few categories that one would need to fill in to be able to create a learner profile. So experts would come together and brainstorm what the name of this fictional learner might be, what their age is, what their motivations are for joining the course, what their living situation is like. And even though things like living situation are not necessarily directly relevant for developing learning materials, we know how important context is in learning, because we are shaped by our environments, and our environments are shaping us. So just to give this, to contextualize a learner, this current template has all these different categories. And this template is something that has been tested at the OU for many years already. So we adapted this template for the purposes of co-creating a learning persona with AI. And we are in this era when we can talk about co-creation with AI as if it's an autonomous human. So some projects touch upon co-creating with ecosystems, co-creating with stakeholders. But in this project, we are doing both. So we are co-creating with AI, and we are co-creating with ecosystems that my colleagues will touch upon later. Once we've located the template, the next step was to brainstorm together as a consortium who we are developing our learning materials for. And we had the whole entire work package dedicated to this. So our colleagues from the Netherlands were leading on this work. So they analyzed the field and put together categories of stakeholders who we might want to target within the project. And these were also divided between levels. So this is something that we continue doing in Work Package 3. So we had a list, but we also wanted to conceptualize the relationships between these different stakeholders. And we also wanted to identify what sort of educational level we want our materials to be targeting. So we had some level 0, level 1 educational levels, which just introduce the concepts that the project is covering, such as energy digitalization. We had level 2, where we have more specialized stakeholders that support the general public, such as, for example, small enterprises. As you can see here in the slide, we have level 1. So these are more general public, for example, tenants, users. But on level 2, we had more specialized stakeholders. And we then thought, well, is there level 3 as well, which is, for example, digital company owners offering solutions that are directly relevant to energy digitalization. So we had this conceptual work behind the scenes before we started working with AI. And if we go into the next slide, here we started conceptualizing the steps we followed for this co-creation. So as I've mentioned, the first step was, even before we worked with AI, was to brainstorm a list of stakeholders that our materials will cover. For the purposes of this study, we put together a list of 9 stakeholders, and I'll discuss them a bit later. Then we had this learning persona template that was tested widely within our university, and we adapted it for the purposes of the project. So for example, the original template did not have learning outcomes because these are developed by other teams directly for each course. But within the project, we were designing this learning materials and digital essential courses from scratch. So we also needed to conceptualize learning outcomes, what our learners will understand, will be able to do after they follow our materials. So these were added onto the template that we adapted for the purposes of this study, for the purposes of the project. And then we also thought, well, which AI tools we can use to create these learning personas. And one important point we made as a project team is that we're not evaluating a specific AI tool. We are sort of trying to understand if Gen AI fits the purposes of this task, particularly understanding how much hype there is currently around Gen AI and some overinflated expectations as to what AI can do. So we searched around and narrowed our search to chatbots because they provide an interface, conversational interface, where one would not need a technical expertise to be able to work with these tools. And we try to also identify chatbots, Gen AI chatbots that would have different architecture and different cutoff training point for the data that's fed into them, so that we could see if the outputs produced from these chatbots, well, if they what sort of similarities, differences they have as well, and whether we can work with these outputs later on. So we're working with ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and Claude, these three chatbots that are available to general public. And then we started this process, continued this process of co-creation. So we started using prompts. And here you can see the example prompt that was also the first prompt used with the chatbot. So make a profile for a university educator from a technical background looking to teach a course about energy digitalization. This topic is new to them. What do the person's qualifications, interests, motivations tend to be like? What sort of projects, initiatives are they likely to be involved in? What does their lifestyle tend to be like? Suggest a first name and a last name for them, age and location of where they're most likely to be based. Also, because sort of at the back of our minds, the purpose that we had for this study is to fine-tune the prompts that we are using to create personas. We used initial prompts, but then we are also putting together a checklist as to how prompts for these tasks can be fine-tuned to get the high quality output. So we used the original the template that we located and adapted for the purposes of the project. So the categories in the template were used as prompts for the purposes of the study. And once we created the persona, then we turned to the experts within the project and within the ecosystems who would review the personas, leave comments as to things they liked about the persona and specific suggestions they had as to how this can be improved. So this important phase of expert validation also did take place once the personas were created. So if we go to the next slide, this is the second, the example of the learning persona that was created with Gen AI. So here we have Dr. Clara Moreno. So the title, first name, last name, something that was generated by AI. We did not interfere there, but this is something that we reviewed together with experts in name, picture, and all the different outputs for the different prompts as well. So all the pictures were generated with GenCraft. That's another Gen AI tool that is used specifically for picture generations. Also, when we were generating the picture, the prompt that we were using, we looked at the output that Gen AI produced. So the name that was suggested by the chatbot, location, age, and then these were used as a prompt to generate the picture. So this is the picture that Gen AI produced for us. And then the template followed with overall description of the position this person has, where they're located, their age, their living situation, qualifications, etc. So in this study, we used or evaluated 9 learning personas. So here I have some examples of these, just to give you an idea of what sort of learning personas we were working with. So for example, electricity retailer, is a manager working for an electricity retailer who wants their company to offer more energy digitalization products. So that was one of the personas that we evaluated. University, so for example, Dr. Clara Moreno is the AI output, a university educator from technical background who is embarking on teaching a new course on energy digitalization. We had personas from non-governmental organizations, so project manager from an NGO focused on Europe's energy transition. Flexibility aggregator, that's something that's very relevant for energy ecosystems. So operations manager at the flexibility aggregator who is just starting in this new job and looking for some induction material on the topic. So all of these personas, they are part of our stakeholder mapping. So these are sort of target people that we want our materials to be relevant to. And that's sort of how we they inspired the personas that were created within the study and within the project. So if we go to the next slide, then we had phase 2, which is expert validation, and it's an important phase when working with AI. Because the original learning personas that are done by humans, it's usually the experts together with educational learning designers who work together. And one needs to understand the context to be able to review this. So what we try to do in the study and in the project is to match reviewing experts with personas based on their professional affiliation. The first persona, electricity retailer, was reviewed by a consortium, and that was a test persona just to see whether it is something that this output can even be reviewed, whether it's of a good enough quality. And then 7 additional personas were reviewed in one-on-one interviews. So, for example, a consultant from a digital agency affiliated with the project, he reviewed a digital company owner. So we did try to match the expertise of reviewers with the professional affiliation of our fictional learners. To be able to maximize the time we had in one-to-one interviews, we sent the personas generated by AI together with a link to chatbot conversation. And this is something that can be shared. So whether you're working with ChatGPT or DeepSeek or Claude, you can, well, those conversations are saved, but you can also make them public. You can share the link to those conversations with other interested parties. And we also shared the interview questions in advance. So when we met with our experts during those research interviews, those review sessions, they sort of already had ideas as to what they want to suggest, things they want to improve in the persona, and things they liked about the personas. So here in the slide, I also included some interview questions. How accurate is the persona? How representative is the persona of a professional working for the affiliation? So for example, an aggregator. Does anything need changing in the persona to improve it? Does the photo effectively capture the persona's role and identity? If not, what changes would you suggest and how would they enhance the representation? Are the learning outcomes okay? Do any need amending? Are there any missing? What would you recommend to look out for when reviewing such AI-generated personas? And what would your advice be to someone who uses AI to generate such personas? Another thing that we also found as the study unfolded is that it's good to benchmark the personas against LinkedIn profiles of real professionals, just to add another layer of triangulation. I think whenever there is a chance to triangulate what experts or a group of participants say or says or does, it's good to use those methods. So LinkedIn served the purpose really well. There are quite a few public profiles where people uh, showcase the qualifications they have and previous experiences. Um, and even, well, sometimes projects they are involved in. So it was really interesting to see to what extent the persona that was generated by AI, to what extent they reflect the field of professionals. And then there was a phase of analysis. In our case, it was a thematic analysis for this study. So if we go to the next slide, and I see that already some questions, which is great. So at the end of my presentation, I'll be really happy to discuss any aspects of this study with you all. So thank you for posting questions in the chat. So these are emerging themes from the study. There were some positive reactions, and I must say that overall experts were quite positive about what Gen AI was able to do. The sort of overarching positive comment was that persona is context sensitive, and I will unpack each of these themes in my upcoming slides. Narrative was cohesive, so the later parts of the persona speak to what was mentioned in the beginning. Um, uh, Same goes, for example, Gen AI chooses a location of where persona is based, and then later parts of the persona speak to that location so that it all flows well. It does look like the different parts of the persona belong together. Interestingly, there were few gender language cues. And again, I will unpack what this means later on. But there were also things to improve. And we are developing a checklist as to what these things are so that when we are working with Gen AI later on to create such curriculum outputs, these things to improve can be taken into consideration. So Gen AI Superman, I will discuss this, what this means. Profile photo does not necessarily show diversity. So all the personas generated were white. So that's something I will touch upon as well. Unspoken elements missing. So there are some, or even though it is context sensitive, but there are some issues that it didn't reflect. The Gen AI did not take those issues into account. And there was also a theme around the need to flag ethical dimensions of personas' work. And I think as we are all working in education, even though professionals in the real field might not even flag those things in their professional profiles, but as educators and as drivers of ethics and ethical ways of working and being, I think this is important to flag those things in personas as well. So now let's dive into these themes. So if we go into the next slide, I'll start by talking about the positives.
Irene,
Yeah.
you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Denise, for letting me know. So personas were context sensitive. So it picked up the differences in professional context between commercial and non-profit jobs. There was a spot on location. So for example, if the persona is offering agri-tech solutions, then it was located in the Netherlands, which is the leader of agri-tech. As I said, narrative is cohesive. It all sticks together. So for example, Elliot, our investment banker, he is quite well off. So our expert commented on him having disposable income. And it was also the only persona who had a second property, a vacation property. So kind of it creates this well-rounded picture of someone who has a high socioeconomic status. Few gender language cues. So we know from studies that people working in certain jobs that, for example, are female dominated, there are specific gender language cues used already in job ads. So for example, female-dominated fields mention work-life balance, they mention caring opportunities for children. But I was, for example, pleased to see that our personas did not use as many gender language cues like this. So even male personas, it was mentioned, work-life balance was mentioned for them. So it was good to see this. And if we go into the next slide, the negatives, I will probably just focus on one only, and that's Gen AI Superman. So the overarching finding is that Gen AI created this really successful, really powerful people who know every aspect of relation between digital and energy. And that's also probably has to do with how we portray ourselves in the job market. We never talk about failures or things that didn't work out or the different career breaks that we take, but we want ourselves to stand out as someone successful. And since Gen AI takes this data from the internet, they also create this really successful people. And since we are, the interesting thing about humans is that we are complex. So it's good to also show areas of growth as well as successes. So that's it was, I think, an interesting finding from this study. And finally, I'll just quickly go through the checklist. So if you go on to the next slide, so what our emerging advice is for someone who wants to co-create with a Gen AI for curriculum. So make prompts as narrow and specific as possible. So if you're, for example, talking about a company owner, what the size of the company is. If it's an NGO, are they regional focused or are
Irina,
they?
you're going to have to wrap up. So
Yeah.
just read out maybe the 5 points, but that must be it then, because we must move on. Sorry.
Avoid overly idealized expertise, prompt diversity, check against LinkedIn profiles, and prompt chatbot to discuss ethical considerations as well. Sorry for making it longer than I anticipated. I just get really inspired and I get carried away when I talk about research. But we are writing up this study, so please do get in touch. If you have any further questions, I'll be happy to share the paper once it's published.
Thank you so much, Irina. Thank you. Now, there are some questions in the chat. Some of them just you need to write something down. People want to know names or whatever. And we'll pick it up at the end or just answer in the chat. Thank you so much. Now, we move over to Beck. Beck Pitt has been with us in the university in IET a long time. She's a very valued member of staff and an expert in open educational resources. So I'm going to hand over to you, Beck. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Denise, for that warm overview. And yeah, so lovely to see so many colleagues on the call today. Happy Open Education Week. It's brilliant to be with you. And yeah, as Denise said, my name is Beck Pitt, and I'm going to be talking about co-creating the Every1 learning materials with you for the next few minutes. So what I'm going to start off by doing is talking a little bit about the processes that we're using with colleagues and our and other organisations to create our learning materials. I'm then going to talk a little bit, I'll give you a bit of an overview of our learning materials even before I get started, and then also talk a bit about open practices and how we're using those within the project. So we're producing around, as Denise mentioned at the start, we're producing a range of different learning materials as part of the Every1 project. There's around 80 in total, and a lot of these are being translated into a range of European languages as well. So we're really focused on everyone, as the project implies, is we're really looking to engage with everybody in different ways around issues of digital energy and the digital energy transition, the role that digital technologies have in the consumption and production of energy, etc. So we're doing that by making the learning materials available in a range of different formats. You can see some of these on the right-hand side. We've got videos, we've got short courses, we've got a MOOC that's for students that's currently being developed. We've got board games for children. We've got information booklets, lots of different kind of formats to take into account different people's needs. As was mentioned earlier in today's presentation, we're aiming at a range of different audiences and a range of different familiarities with kind of issues and the digital energy transition, and really looking as well to engage with audiences that are new to the digital energy transition and what that means. All of our learning materials are licensed CC BY Share Alike 4.0. So really, that kind of enabling people to localize and make use of our resources for their own context is really important. Although we're trying to reflect as many different contexts across Europe as possible in our learning materials, we also obviously want to give people the opportunity to make changes to the learning materials to keep them updated as well for sustainability purposes. So that's really key to the work that we're doing. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do that later on in this section shortly. We're delighted to say, and I'll walk us through these in a moment, that the first batch of our learning materials was released a month ago in early February. You can find those available on the QR code here on the right-hand side and via the link. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about some of those now, and about our Digital Energy Essentials courses as well. So we'll move on and I'll tell you a little bit about these. So as you can see on this slide here, we released 11 learning materials around a month ago. On the left-hand side, you can see here we have 6 of these are focused particularly around what is the digital energy transition, why is it important, why do we want to digitalize energy, why does it matter? And we've got videos, information booklets, and short courses, so the Digital Energy Essentials courses. And I'll come on and talk a little bit more about those in a moment. And then also we have a short video around digital inclusion, the importance of inclusion when we're talking about the digital energy transition. And as I mentioned, and is really key to the project as well, we have a commitment to reach hard to reach groups as part of the work that we're doing, and really kind of raising awareness around issues like digital inclusion is really important to us. You can also see here on the right-hand side that we have a range of resources for energy communities, so different types of energy communities, raising awareness of what energy communities are, and so on. So we've got some great resources there. We also released a board game for children, Peacocks to the Off-Peak, which is available. And then also at the bottom of the list here, you can see we have a short video which introduces you to reusing Every1 learning materials. So we've got all of our materials are openly licensed, and really important to that is that we're also raising awareness of the affordances and what you can do because of that open license. So one of the things that we're doing in the project is releasing a series of videos and other assets that will help support people and understand what they can do with Every1 learning materials. So that's the first of those videos, was released recently. As I mentioned, and I wanted to focus on just for a moment now, we have our Digital Energy Essentials courses. They are hosted on the Open University's Open Learn Create platform, which anyone can come and use. And this is a suite of 12 free open badged courses, online courses. And each of these courses, they're kind of bite-sized, they're 30 minutes. It's a standalone course. You can go there, you can find out more about digital energy. You can find out more about hot topics such as energy, privacy, safety, and security. We've also got kind of related materials coming on energy myths and other topics related to this. And it's really about, as you can see here on the slide, giving people that fundamental information on different aspects of energy digitalization and making these exciting and relevant through practical advice and activities. So these courses are aimed at the general public, and they've got a particular focus on reducing and managing energy consumption at home, taking practical steps. If you're interested in new technologies and how these make a difference to the production and consumption of energy, also exploring around these kind of topics. And then also, obviously, concern about climate change and rising energy costs as well. So these are a suite of 12 courses as well. 3 of those are available currently. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a flavour of the learning materials that we're producing as part of the project. So really exciting, and we're going to have these be sharing these across the coming months, and translated versions of these as well. So very exciting stuff. So, as was mentioned, and Irina presented as well, co-creation in relation to our learning personas. I'm going to talk a little bit more here about the importance of co-creation generally in the project, the kind of working together that we do, both within the consortium and the partners that you saw earlier. We've got 11, we're one of 11 amazing partners on this project, how we work together and throughout the project. And co-creation is really central to how we create our learning pathways. And Chris is going to talk about that work in the next section of this presentation, but also really key to the production of our online and offline learning materials. And central to this, of course, is our learner needs, as you can see on the right-hand side here, and also the information and the understanding that we have of these through discussions and activities with our stakeholders and colleagues. Underpinning this as well is principles, the Access Project co-creation approach around agile and responsiveness to stakeholder needs. And also this is reflected in the way the project has been developed. For example, we already, as you saw, have a range of formats which will appeal to different people. We're translating learning materials, and we're also flexible timelines are really key, as I'll go on and hopefully illustrate when I talk a little bit more about how we work together. We also have focused meetings within the project to support that kind of coordination of communication in the work that we're doing. And we really look to actively engage with different communities around co-creation. Oops. Perfect. So just to give you an idea here, this is from the Access Project here. And what's really important about this project is the focus on diverse and marginalized communities. And again, that's something, as I mentioned, that's really important to our project as well. It's the people that are maybe more difficult to reach and engage with, but it's really important that we engage with everybody in relation to the digital energy transition. So this ladder of co-creation of learning here, you can see there's an arrow to the left-hand side here, which is kind of where we're at in terms of our own, the way that we work within the Every1 project. So as you'll see, we offer people different ways they can engage in co-creation activities with the project. And we kind of very much have a very listening and open approach to the way that we work. And I'll go on and talk a little bit more about that shortly. So just to move on now and talk about how we identify the topics and the types of learning materials. So the first way in which we do this is through conversations and feedback from stakeholders and collab and people we're working with. And this is to really identify knowledge gaps, things that are missing in the current available learning materials. One of the things that we've identified, or there's two things I'd like to highlight. The first is around energy myths and the need for more kind of resources to debunk myths around the digital energy transition, around energy more generally. That's been highlighted as something that's really key. And another is, just one example, is having something, for example, to help brief journalists, for example, around the digital energy transition and the kind of key things that you need to know. So these are things where we're listening to stakeholders, we're listening to people we're connected to in external stakeholders, listening to them, and then developing and feeding that into our development of learning materials. As we'll hear from Chris as well, we reviewed existing learning materials in the digital energy transition on energy digitalization. And then, of course, we have this commitment that's built into the project to deliver a varied range of learning material formats. So I'm just going to talk briefly now about working together, both within the consortium and with colleagues external to the project. Just to give you a flavour of the way that we build consensus and that kind of working together. So we've got quite a lot of learning materials that we're producing. And obviously, in order to streamline that kind of working process, we are producing and testing these in 5 cycles across the kind of project duration. And really key to this is giving colleagues the opportunity to showcase their expertise. Of course, we're coming from the OU with our learning design, our learning material expertise, and colleagues, as you saw in the partner list, are coming with expertise on different facets of digital energy, and we're bringing that together to kind of produce learning materials. And really key to this is identifying expertise within the consortium, and then also kind of having that consensus and agreeing those kind of working processes. So when we're looking to kind of create learning materials together, we kind of bring together people into a meeting, a kind of space in which we talk about the processes and the timelines and the way that we're going to work together to get consensus around that. We have a templated approach. So we're creating these learning materials, offering people a templated approach and providing lots of support for that through documents and through things like image trackers. We also focus on key points for learning material creation as part of what we're doing. So one of the things that was maybe people were a bit less familiar with was open licensing. So we've had a couple of sessions where we've talked about open licensing in more detail and about the implications for the work that we're doing together. Once those kind of teams have been agreed for individual learning materials, we will then work together in those expert teams to really kind of deep dive on the content, the audience. We heard a little bit about the work that Irina has been doing with colleagues as well earlier. And we're kind of really looking then to refine and set the scene really for the work that we're going to do over the coming weeks. So really having that shared understanding about the learning material and agreeing our team working approaches, etc. So that's really key to that. And what we've been using to develop these learning materials is a sprint approach, and really kind of over a set period of time for around 3 weeks or so, working together to rapidly produce content for these learning materials. And this has been really successful. I know it's been worked really well in other contexts as well. For example, the creation of open textbooks in British Columbia, for example. So it's been used, this is really successful, and it's worked really well as well for the Every1 project, I think. In terms of working together in the community, as I mentioned earlier, we have feedback and ongoing conversations with our kind of external partners, with committed ecosystems around those kind of knowledge gaps and understanding, you know, where we can add value and provide learning materials. We also offer people the opportunity to get involved in co-authoring and developing learning materials with us. And this is very much a kind of very flexible process, which is led by listening to the community and the conversations that we're having with different groups and organizations. Could be local authorities, could be energy communities, and organizations that were involved in energy. We're listening and having conversations with them to see how whether they would be interested in something like this and responding flexibly to that. And obviously there's benefits to being involved, as it says here, the opportunity to showcase expertise, to be a case study, as you saw. We've got a number of different case studies that we're releasing as part of the project, but really keeping that flexibility in mind and exploring ways in which people can be involved and what works best for them. That's really key, I think, here. We also have people are very much engaged and invited to be part of the opportunity to test our learning materials. So once we've developed learning materials, these are tested as part of the project and through surveys and interviews. This work is led by our colleagues at TU Delft. And what we do is we showcase our learning materials before the testing. And as part of that, I'm really key to building those relationships with organizations and listening and showing that we're listening is a segment called You Said We Did, which is where we report back on the feedback that we had about the learning materials and what our response to that feedback is. So really trying to be transparent and upfront about what we're doing and our response to that. And we also provide overviews of materials and engage with people in different ways around testing. Finally, just to finish, I just wanted to talk a little bit about three kind of challenges and opportunities, I suppose, around openness, open practices, and the role that open practices have within the project. We heard a little bit about the open license that we've got applied, that we've applied to our learning materials. Just a little bit more about the open practices here. So obviously one of the kind of challenges, as it were, is that we've got different expertise across the consortium. So really we're working together, and we're working together to create these different learning materials. So this is really an opportunity to really help better understand colleagues and get to know people, and work out how we can really showcase this and use people's expertise in the best way possible. And it's also a really good opportunity to develop that supportive approach. And this is really key to really developing a kind of working environment which is yeah, I think has really been a really positive, one of the many positive things has been this supportive and collegiate approach that we've had here. So we've been providing examples, providing structure, really supporting people in the work that they're doing, and getting consensus around that and being transparent and listening to people. So agreeing those ways of working, and that includes things like the use of sprint methods to do that, the kind of timelines we're working to, etc. So those are all really good, important things, as well as modeling good practices, providing examples of things. So for example, when we started working on our digital energy essentials courses, having an example course there so that people could see what does it look like when we talk about these short courses. So keeping that flexible, iterative, being flexible and iterative is just super important to the work that we're doing. It's important to the co-creation offer for colleagues as well, when we have those conversations with people externally as well to the project. Another challenge, as I mentioned earlier, is around these different understandings of open licenses. And this is a really good opportunity to have conversations around openness, around the role that it can have within the project, and also to hold those supportive sessions with activities to raise awareness and engagement with open educational resources. It's also, as I mentioned, a really good opportunity to listen to people's needs and think about the type of assets that might support the reuse. So if you're putting something on an open license and working with people in the way that we're doing in this project, it's really important as well to raise awareness about that opportunity to reuse and localize the learning materials for those different contexts, because there's such a range of different contexts across Europe, and obviously we can't necessarily reflect all of those as we would like to in the learning materials themselves. And then finally, and I guess the challenge of maintaining engagement as well with people. And I think one of the things that's been really key to this is having that kind of respectful ongoing conversation and dialogue with people, but also increasing transparency, looking for ways to build trust and show that we respond to the needs of our colleagues, and that we're really listening to them. And this helps also ensure, and it's an opportunity to ensure, that our project outputs are meaningful, relevant, and up to date. And then also within the project itself, thinking about opportunities to share insights and coordinate activities, having that openness within the project as well, and looking for ways that we can increase that. So I mentioned here that there's a particular meetings that we have where we bring together people from across the consortium to share the kind of conversations that they're having with different types of colleagues that we're working with. And I think that's yeah, everything from me. So thanks so much for listening and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beck. And we've got things in the chat, so if you could look at those. But that's brilliant, because that tied us up, creating a persona. Then how are we going to create the materials to match these personas with a large number of partners and experts? And thank you for describing how we co-created and found a method of working well with our partners. Thank you, Beck. Now I'd like to hand over to Chris Edwards, who's going to tell us what we're going to do with all of the things that we found out about personas and these learning materials. Over to you, Chris.
All right, thank you very much, Denise. I should say, I see there's two questions in the chat that we can pick up at the end of this, so we won't forget. So next slide, please, Beck. Okay, so one of the important things that we promised within the grant agreement is that we would design learning pathways, or a range of learning pathways. And in an attempt to try and explain what these are, or how we view learning pathways, one way is to think of a journey, and we all make journeys, and we all know that you go from a start to an ending point, and quite often you have opportunities to take different routes. So if you're in a real rush and you just need to get there quickly, then you take the fastest route. And if you have a lot of leisure time and you just want to enjoy the scenery, then you might take the scenic route through the mountains. Or you might also opt to choose a route that takes you through cultural landmarks, or look at towns and monuments. So there's different choices that we make that will determine our route. I'm not suggesting that these are directly transferable to thinking about study routes, but they do suggest that there's ways in which we could choose to study a range of material, or choose a path through a range of material that can still get us to the end, where we've achieved and learned the learning outcomes that are needed, but in a way that might be different from the person next to us. So pathways support personalization in learning. They allow different combinations of materials to be brought together to help individuals achieve the learning outcomes. There are lots of reasons why people would choose a different path or choose different items to learn from. It might be that they really enjoy learning from particular kinds of video, or it might be that they really enjoy just reading and learning from the written word, or listening to audio, or a combination. And they might have some special needs that might mean that they need to go into the materials in a different way, or they might need to be supported in a different way. It might be also someone who has a particular difficulty learning about a particular item or a particular concept that other people might find straightforward. And so we might not all want to take the same route. And also illustrated this with this set of jigsaw-related images, where we can imagine that we might have a big box of millions of jigsaw parts, and depending on your learning needs, or you might create a different image using different parts, but the image might still represent all the learning outcomes that were needed for that piece of learning. So that's how we tend to view learning paths. Is to do with personalization, and it's to do with giving people choice. And we obviously need to explain those to people in a way that allows them to make their choice. There's no point just jumping, as I've shown there, there's no point us presenting our learning materials just as a box of jigsaw parts and saying, keep trying until you find one that works. We need to help guide people through. So there's some similarities and differences between both those diagrams that I've used there. So moving on to the next slide. If we're making and creating study paths to suggest to people there's some steps that we need to go through to start to do this. So one of the things we need to do is we need to understand the learning landscape. We need to get to know it. We need to know what the overall educational aim is that we're trying to include within the learning. We need to know what topics we're covering or what kind of level we're covering them to. And from this combination, we'll set or create a set of learning outcomes, intended learning outcomes. They're the things that we're planning for people to learn. Everyone learns a lot more on top of that as well, of course. And that's partly why learning is so personal. We also need to know about the learner and or the potential learner here. And so part of this is predictive. We're trying to think about who we're creating these materials for, these pathways, who are likely to come to study this, and what are their characteristics? What is it about them that we want to try and support? And obviously, Irina has spoken at length already about the use of personas and thinking about them. So once we have those two things in place, we need to think about our repository of learning materials. For us on this project, as you've heard, we're in the middle of creating a whole range of materials that are bespoke to this project. So they're directly produced to all fit together in a sense that they will have the same kind of characteristics at their core. They will be aimed at the overall aims of the Every1 project, looking at supporting EU citizens widely. So I think we are creating a whole set of materials that will already be hopefully perfectly positioned to support the learning in this area. And as Beck already explained, we're co-creating those. So we're producing some things or some ideas, and we're sharing those with partners that have come to join us from the wider public, that we can actually share those ideas and get feedback on those. And we also, once we produce a learning material, we're testing it and we're trialing it out and getting feedback with which we're acting on. So these materials are going to be center to many of the pathways that we offer. In the grant agreement, we also committed to looking at what open educational resources there are more widely that might support learning in this area. And one of the first things we did at the beginning of the project was bring all those together in a list, just a Google sheet of with one row for each item that we'd found. And we found just over 140 from the various OER, open educational resource repositories that are around. And we add those essentially to our repository that we're looking at for creating pathways. There are some things that we obviously need to gather and we need to understand about all of our materials. For instance, how do they contribute to the learning outcomes? How long do they take to study? What's the format of these? Whether they're PDF or are they web pages? Are they audio and video? Can they be downloaded and studied offline? What language are they in? What language options do I have to convert them to? There's a whole range of questions you can imagine that we can include within this. So we need to then go through our repository when we understand what learning we want to deliver, and then map each of our learning resources against those. So if we move on to the next slide, we end up with something like this, a spreadsheet with, as I said before, we at the time we did this first mapping, we had about just over 150 altogether items, because we added the ones that we produced so far. And we mapped those. We looked at, if you look at the coloured columns, they're individual learning outcomes. And if you look at the rows are individual study materials. And we've identified which learning outcomes those study materials support. There obviously, this is only a portion of the full 150 odd set of items. And what we've done is we've tried to start to group these together. And so we've grouped these together into paths that kind of fit. Obviously, there are a whole group that uses their core, the Every1 materials, the materials that we're producing as a project. And we see those probably as being the most viable, the most useful to people. At the time we did this mapping, we've only produced a proportion of our materials. So we've gone outside our materials here to add and complete the learning outcomes. But we'll need to revisit this as we finalize the creation of our materials. And you'll see there's a type column there, which there's a second column in. I've tended to call items core if they're central to all the pathways within that group. And then they become not optional, and the various types of options depending on whether whether you can choose it against another as an alternative to another item within an element. And we have different groups of options. So it starts to get very complicated looking at this. And if you look at the groups, we have the Every1 materials groups there. We also have another group that I've just called slightly more advanced because it's based around one core item, which is produced by another organization, and it's set at a slightly more advanced level than we'd probably expect at this level of our learning. But there might be some people that will be perfect for, and that will become the core of that pathway. And then there's 3 other options for finishing off. One of the things Beck pointed out was that one of our main reasons for producing these materials and for this project as a whole is to produce a set of resources that can be developed and reused and for particular purposes by particular groups within the EU. And so the particular license that the materials are offered with is very important. So that final column in this table is one of license. And all our materials, as Beck pointed out, are a Creative Commons license by share alike version 4. And so anyone can reuse those to create their own materials, as long as then they're prepared to share them in the same way. There are a whole load of other options as well. Where I've written other there, it tends to be that the copyright is being retained by the author. And so really, if you want to go and reuse those, you have to contact the author and ask for their permission. Otherwise, you can obviously, because they're in the open educational space, you can point people to them to study, but they don't have the option to rework them. The last set of paths in this spreadsheet, or this part of the spreadsheet that I'm showing, are the pathways that are towards building an energy community. And building community was something that is also core to the Every1 project. And so we've got some specific pathways that relate to that. Having them in a spreadsheet like this comes out of the mapping, and you can do some reorganization of the rows in this spreadsheet, and you can label different rows in different ways. But it is quite hard to visualize or to understand exactly what's going on in terms of pathways. So we also have other ways of looking at these materials. So Beck, if you move on to the next slide. Here's another way. So if you go down from the title, so the level 1, group 1, Every1 material paths are on the right here. And there's this contains the most items. Because they're quite short. Generally, they're sort of half an hour items that we tend to have. But if you look at the way in which I've drawn this, if you work down from the top, at the top of this, it says core, and it has items 1003 to 1006. So there's 4 items within that little image icon there. And altogether, because they're half an hour each, that's 2 hours of study notionally, where we obviously don't know for exactly how long it will take for everyone. But so we've got this notional 2 hours of study, and as core to all the paths at this level and this group. And then after that, you've got an option of either going to that item on the left, which is 1007, or the option on the right, which is 1008. And both of those are half an hour courses from our Digital Energy Essentials courses. And then you've got another choice after that of one of three. And if you look at the one on the right, that third one is a combination of materials. It's item 55 and 77 taken together. That is 16 hours or so of study on its own. So you might not want to choose that. You might want to choose one of the other options if you were working through those paths, and so on. And then there's a question mark in the row below because I need to double check the length of time that we actually would need to take on that study. And then we get down to the end of that, and the last item there is a required item, because you can't assess. I think we'd have to say it was a core item that you would use that to finish off. So this suggests that there's an order, and there might well be, although this isn't intended from this particular diagram. I think generally the path that we're creating here and our Digital Energy Essential courses are really designed to be studied in any order. So you could choose which order you want to study those in. So when we present a pathway to a potential learner, we would need to indicate whether there's a particular order that we would recommend you study these, or whether you can study them in any order. So that's the most complicated set of paths there, and I think there's 12 paths through there if you look at that. And then if you look at the group 2, which is the row on the left, there's obviously a core, and then there's and that's the advanced path that's centered around one external resource. But then there's 3 options below that, so there's 3 potential study paths there, and we need to help people judge between those. So we need to show what's the difference between those paths and what's the value to them of choosing one over the other. And then there's the last group here. There's only two choices through there, 2 options. So again, we would need to help people distinguish between those 2 and which is most useful for them. So that's a very helpful way of visually plotting out a set of pathways, and it's a way of beginning to engage with it and starting to see where we need to give advice to individuals to help them choose. So if we go on to the next slide, Beck. Ultimately, we will want to build the pathways into a pathways tool, and we will probably need to provide it with data in the form of a table, which is obviously like a database that it can easily call on. So I've just set out 2 ways of doing that here. So we've got those same groups that we were working with, and in that first half on the left, to the left of the green vertical column, we've got just the items listed in just in numerical order, and that's an arbitrary order of where they are placed in our catalogue, in our repository. So that doesn't really say anything about the order of the study of the materials, but it just shows that some paths have more materials and some have fewer materials that you can call on. And then on the right-hand side, we've rearranged that slightly. So again, we've got all the rows are the same, but in terms of columns, we've added a column for each of the items. So you see item 19 has its own column, right through to, on the right-hand side, 1008 has its own column. So we could just put a tick or a 1 instead of the item, but it seemed easier, well, because it was already there with the detail item number. In each case, I've maintained that, and that shows really within terms of the item space, if you like, what would be used within each path, and we can start to see there perhaps a bit more clearly and what's the differentiating each path. And we can see in the first group of paths there's a very small number of changes that are really being made to distinguish between the paths. And so I think what we will probably choose to do is not present all of those paths to potential learners, because they might, it would be hard to describe exactly how they were different. And so we would try and select one or two paths that we would think are the most useful for the majority, and we would recommend them and name them in a way that helped distinguish. And I think for the advanced and the community groups, it is probably a bit more straightforward. But again, we might choose one of each of those as being the one that we would recommend, particularly if time was an issue, that might make it easier. So we've talked about what pathways are, what we need to do to when we're creating pathways and thinking about it, and different ways of viewing. So if we move on to the next slide, let's think about some, now at our point in the project, what we'd advise ourselves now if we found some people like us that were just starting out on a project like this. And I think one of the things is that you need to make a balance. Obviously, if you're putting a bid together for funding to carry out a project, you need to make some quite extravagant promises about what you're going to do and deliver. You need to balance that with what is feasible and what is possible. And I think bearing in mind that when you're thinking about reviewing items and creating a learning space and learning outcomes, and then you have to do the reviewing of that can very, very quickly become a very resource-intensive activity. And the other thing to point out there, and I think, is that quality is not the same as quantity. So that if we can have a 50 or 60 learning paths, but actually the quality of those might not be very high, and that we need to be able to identify which are the quality pathways, and they're the ones that we want to recommend. So I think that's something I think that's useful to suggest to anyone that's embarking on anything to do with learning pathways, is to think about those issues. Think about making sure you get the balance right between what you're committing yourself to in terms of resource and what is going to be of value to the people that you're intending will benefit from the project. I think another thing, and I've hinted at it in that last slide, is that we need to be cautious about using materials from too many different providers. And obviously, I've already said that our Every1 materials are actually designed, they're bespoke for this purpose. So we'd expect that our materials would form very strong paths. But we've also are mindful that we're offering paths that might be just alternative paths, but based on materials provided by other suppliers, or other providers rather. And if you think about this, you don't have to look at very many open educational repositories to see that if you look at different materials that are produced and offered within those, that they're not all offered to the same kind of learner. They're not offered at the same level. The quality is quite variable. The way in which they use language is different. There's so many different aspects about them, is that if we wanted to create the best learning experience for individuals, we probably wouldn't want to make them go to a different piece of learning material for every single step, because just the changing between one and the other and getting used to accessing them for a start, but then once you download a PDF or you get to the website, is that you find that they're set out differently as well. There's quite a lot of cognitive overhead in moving from one to the other. So,
Chris, can I give you a 1 minute warning?
You can. And in that case, I will round off and say we need to be careful about using numbers of resources. So we don't fragment the learning experience too much for it to be of value to the user. So next slide. That takes us to takeaways. That's the end of my section. And Beck, did you want to take over for takeaways? or have we got time? No, we haven't really got. Should we do questions at the end and do takeaways now and then go on to questions for everyone?
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks, everybody. Just to before we move on to the Q&A, just a few kind of takeaways from the work that we've been doing to try and draw together some of the threads, lots of exciting things that we've covered over the past hour or so. But as you will have seen, really key to what we do within the Every1 project is really putting our learners, our project partners, the people we're working with, and our stakeholders really at the center of everything that we're doing. Key to doing that is supporting others by modeling good practices, building in that time and space for conversations and building consensus, centering openness and actively kind of building that into the project's activities, both through the open license that we've kind of chosen, but then some of the other open practices that we've incorporated, and then just that kind of being responsive and iterative and really listening to colleagues as well throughout the project. So just a handful of takeaways there to round off today's session. And thanks so much for listening. I think we're now on to, feedback and questions. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Beck. We've got some questions and we have, I guess, 8 minutes. So let's start with Irina with a couple of questions. Let's be, swift. And if we can't answer them, put them into the chat. So Irina, there were a couple of questions there for you.
Thank you so much, Denise. I'm just scrolling through the chat.
Basically, what are the differences? I think the big question was, what are the differences between the chatbots that you used?
I would say that our sort of research question did not focus on the differences at this stage. We largely used the 3 tools just to benchmark the outputs against experts and to look for similarities between them. So the outputs are more or less similar that these 3 chatbots provide. The Claude chatbot from Anthropic does flag more of the ethical considerations that personas have to work around in their jobs. And that's something that the other chatbots did not flag as much. But overall, they have very similar outputs. So well-structured, cohesive narrative. But in all 3 chatbots, the personas look a little bit idealized. So they have qualifications from top universities. They're interested in every aspect of energy digitalization. So there are some interesting recommendations that emerge from it. And part of it is to use prompts that would show the areas of growth of these personas, or use prompts that would suggest don't follow traditional career pathway, add career breaks. Can this persona also have a career break, for example? Or what events in recent years might have motivated this persona to work on energy digitalization project? And we know that climate change is on everyone's radars at the moment.
So these... ask you one quick question as well. Someone wanted to know which chatbot produced that CV that you showed us on the slide.
So that was ChatGPT, and that's a persona, a learning persona.
And they thought it was very well laid out. Sorry
Thank
to
you.
rush you, but thank you, Irina. If there's anything else, can you deal with it on the chat? Let's move to Beck, our second speaker. I see one of the questions was, had you trialed any of the games, Beck?
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks, Anna, for that question as well. Yeah, so my understanding is yes, we did seek feedback from teachers and students around the game Peacocks to the Off-Peak. That was tested in the classroom, I believe, and we'll be producing other materials for secondary schools as well, where we'll be looking to work both on the development and obviously getting feedback as well from relevant kind of groups. So yes, I think is the answer to that. Thank you. And thank you also to Lilith for the question there around whether there is any reference to how to make AI-powered learning green, eco-friendly. Currently in the learning materials, we're still obviously developing, as we talked about, learning materials at the moment. That I don't think has been covered yet, but great suggestion. So thanks so much for sharing that.
Last but not least, Chris, I think you've answered.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I
but
think
there's one really thorny one here,
oh, go on.
which hopefully your colleagues will come in and assist as well. The question is there any reference to how to make AI-powered learning green, brackets, eco-friendly?
Well, I'll start off and everyone can chip in.
Yeah.
I think I think it's an absolutely important question to ask, and it's something that really we've all got on our minds, but we haven't got an easy answer to at the moment. And that's partly because the way in which AI or generative AI in particular, I think is what we're talking about here, is working, is improving all the time. And so if we make decisions just based on how it is now, then they might not be valid in the future. I think what we're also doing is we're piloting things a lot of the time at the moment. So we're not thinking, we're thinking about the uses of that we can and the value of using Gen AI, and we have in our minds that at some point we've got to answer these questions about being green and being and the impact on the environment. And I think that there's just a general guideline that we're using, or that's been suggested within the university, is that to think about what the value of any particular use of AI is providing, and whether you can easily get that from another way. But it's a really important question, and we have got it in mind, but we don't think we've got the right answer at the minute. So I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
Anyone else? Well, I think how to make it green is we need to lobby the people generating these chatbots. We know that they use huge amounts of energy and generate an awful lot of heat. So what we need to do, because we have to cool it as well, is to use that heat through the cooling and maybe power the local town or whatever. So there are big energy questions with the producers, which are certainly out of our control. But I'd like to thank, and I'd like you to thank, our speakers for such an interesting session, which has created more questions maybe than it could be answered. But that means it's a good session, in my opinion. Before we close, I'd like to go through some announcements for Eden. And Beck is going to pull up the slides for me. But the participation has been great. It was lovely to see you all from different countries and where you are, and being so interested in our work and the work of Eden in this Open Educational Week. So first of all, we have a very exciting conference in Bologna, which is going to take place in June. And the final date for paper submissions is March the 15th. Early bird registration, where the price is cheaper. We're all our universities are, trying to save money at the minute, especially in the UK. And so early bird registration is recommended. That's April the 15th. And you can pick up more information here from the slide. And our second slide is about the Eden Digital Education Leadership Academy, which will take place between November the 5th and the 7th. We've had two very excellent sessions in Barcelona in the last 2 years, which people have been very impressed with and learned a lot. So if you're thinking of and are about to step up to be a leader in your university or organization, I recommend you look into this academy. So please save the date. And finally, I think there's one more slide. Don't forget our journal, Eurodl. And it's a free and it's an open journal. Very important to us in the UK, where we've got a ref coming up where everything must be open access. So look up and have a look, and we invite you to submit to our journal. But finally, thank you, our audience, for listening and being so engaged, asking us such interesting questions. And this is Open Educational Week for Eden, and there'll be more going on this week. So we'd love you to join us again. Thank you so much, and goodbye. I'd like to ask our guests to say goodbye as speakers.
Thanks so much, everyone. It was great to see you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Let's stay in touch.
Bye, everyone. Take care.